Hi everyone! Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Christina and I'm the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out some logistics for how tonight's gonna go. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. We'll be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the event, so start thinking of questions to ask now. After the talk tonight, Trang will be signing and personalizing books at the desk near where you checked in. We'll also have additional books available to purchase from my colleagues at the register. If you're joining us virtually on the live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of She is a Haunting online using the link in the live stream description. It's my pleasure to introduce you all tonight to She is a Haunting. A house with a terrifying appetite haunts a broken family in Vietnam in this atmospheric horror, perfect for fans of Mexican Gothic. Trang Tran's debut is a riveting page-turner about the cost of belonging that will leave readers hungry for more. Trang writes speculative stories with big emotions about food, belonging, and the Vietnamese diaspora. They grew up in a big family in Philadelphia, then abandoned degrees in sociology and public health to tell stories in Georgia. When not writing, they can be found over-caffeinating on iced coffee and watching zombie movies. She is a Haunting is their debut novel. Trang will be joined in conversation tonight by Emily X.R. Pan. Emily lives in Brooklyn, but was originally born in the Midwest to immigrant parents from Taiwan. Her debut novel, The Astonishing Color of After, was a New York Times bestseller and winner of a number of awards and honors. She received her MFA in fiction from NYU, where she was a Goldwater Fellow. She was a founding editor-in-chief of Bodega magazine and went on to co-create the Foreshadow platform and anthology. An Arrow to the Moon is her most recent novel. Let's all give a very warm welcome to Trang and Emily.
All right, thanks everyone for coming out. Trang, would you like to give us a sample and tell us a bit about what the book is about?
Yeah, so I'll give you sort of the chaotic elevator pitch, which is angry and closeted queer teen with daddy issues fights a hungry house in Vietnam that just wants friends and internal servitude. Find out what happens when the place that you might belong is actually haunted, and she is a haunting. I'm going to read from the beginning from She is a Haunting. Mouth. This house eats and is eaten. Memories mar the wood, pencil in the heights of children, and wear the scuff marks of well-loved feet. There are echoes that do not stop echoing, trapped in nooks and old curtains until they're found again. Still screaming or laughing, voices dead or gone. What parts are undigested lie waiting. There's no real organ here to rot, only soft wood that termites consider and wasps hollow, but shut the door tight and something can still die. The body becomes full of things it did not ask for. So when a door opens, it is this, the first page of a menu. Chapter 1. I'm a tourist in the country where my parents were born. Even my clothes have been here before me, all made in Vietnam by Vietnamese hands and sent overseas where a Vietnamese American girl, that's me, picks it off the rack and one day brings it to a place she can't call home, but the clothes can if inanimate objects could claim shit. I'm not bitter or confused at all. My fingers tighten on the cart I'm pushing out of Dilax Airport. People stream around me, laboring under giant backpacks, which really is the only thing that would make it more obvious I don't belong. Like how I do one of those finding yourself trips, though. I only have this summer to make up the money for UPenn. Lying to Mom about getting a full scholarship was the only way to stop her from taking out loans when she works 72-hour weeks at the nail salon already. My Walmart on weekends and souping out ice custard happiness part-time every summer at Rita's was just enough to cover SAT registration and college application fees after my little sister's club expenses. That leaves Ba. His money is the thing that's going to make it happen, and I have to see him. That's his condition. There he is, Lily yells, bounding off the cart to sprint toward the idle cars. Ba steps out of a beat-up truck, opening his arms for my sister. He's still slight, tanned, a reddish-brown with black hair trimmed thin. Lily's already telling him everything he's missed in the last 4 years of sparse calls. Jade, he says when I finally catch up. Dad. There are too many sounds in my mouth. This untrained tongue. I don't know how to say hello or I miss you in Vietnamese. We never said either much, and I don't miss him. I hate him. Ba squeezes Lily's shoulder, but his eyes stay on me. I'm almost as tall as him now. Where's your brother? He stayed in Saigon with Mom, I say. Bren barely remembers Ba, or so he claims, so he'd rather hang out with our cousins on Mom's side for the rest of the trip. We stare at each other before I toss both suitcases in the back. I take the middle spot up front since the seatbelt shit, which makes Lily's face do a fake angry thing until Ba gets in the truck. It shifts into gear and we're on our way. It's quiet, then quieter as the other cars and motorbikes fade. Lily's voice is as familiar as a heartbeat, filling the space between us. The air cools against my face, smelling sharply of pine and flowers rather than Saigon's smoke-tinged lungs. Green and gray, soft hints of yellow, and a pink sunrise unfurl to my right. Mountains rise from the mist like candles in an uneven buttercream. I want to smash them down with my thumbs. It's ridiculous that Dilac is so beautiful when I am this angry. We're 15 minutes from the city, says Ba, closer to our house. I want to correct him. It's not my house. I don't belong here. Stay this summer, 5 weeks, and you get what you want, he told me during the April call. Will I? Ba spent years building the perfect houses that aren't ours, all lost in a black hole where a 13-year-old girl had to become a father for her siblings. How's your mom? You could call her. My attempt at casual comes out bitchy, which Lily confirms by lodging an elbow in my rib. I step on her toes, but she's fine. It's the first time Mom's come back in decades, since she stepped onto a boat drifting for an American dream. From the moment we landed in Saigon from Philly, Mom started crying, then sobbing and laughing as she hugged her brothers and sisters. Her family is overwhelming in the best way, which means the entire week was just food and karaoke and so much of her laughing. It gnaws at me how I could have taken this visit away from her just for tuition money. Ba slows around another bend on the road. The forest closes in, branches near enough to brush the truck hood like braided fingers, urging us back to the earth. We're so tucked away that no one would be able to hear us scream. Glass blinks between treetops, the dark eyes of abandoned houses. The French left them after the Americans ran, Ba says. I roll my eyes. Communism, bad for real estate. The truck veers onto a dirt driveway where the pines cluster all around. The heady fragrance of flowers thickens, luring us closer. We stop. The house juts upwards, yellow and tangled in vines. Roots crisscross the body, grow into the wood, and drag it whole into the hill. Hydrangeas climb the crumbling walls beside tall and thin windows, their white blooms kissed with lazy bees. They're the most loved thing here.
Ooh, thank you. So, what was the original? I'm looking at questions on my phone. I'm not live tweeting, I promise. What was the original source of inspiration for this book?
So I started writing this book in spooky season, 2020. I was stuck inside my house like everybody. And I worked off of the question, what are you most afraid of? And like most people, it wasn't, immediately like, I'm afraid of ghosts or I'm afraid of werewolves. It was like, I'm afraid of having really deep conversations with my family. And, things like...
Terrifying.
Yes, very terrifying. Loneliness and, finding out like where you belong when you're between cultures, right? When you're on the threshold of becoming an adult, figuring yourself out, heading off to college, right? So I wanted to write a very specific story about a Vietnamese girl who was going through all of these things. And sort of the second part of the inspiration was abandoned houses, because it's like, we spend so much of our time in houses, like what do they like see over time and what memories do they hold? And they're lonely during the pandemic too, right? No one's visiting them, right? And in Dilac, there are French colonial homes that were left behind, and they're crumbling and they're creepy, and it just felt like the perfect setting to talk about, this very broken family and this girl who's looking for a place to belong.
It's so creepy to think of houses as these sentient things that, like, they're always watching us. Like, we talk about how creepy it is when you have, like, 1,000 pictures of your pet sleeping on your phone. Like, you would never do that to a human, but then imagine what a house is recording. So what was most surprising to you as you were writing this, as you delved into this?
I think the most surprising part was that the house has a point of view. And really I feel like the book didn't take off until I figured that out, is that the house has its own voice, right? And that affects the structure of the story. whatever's going on in the house chapters, that influences what's going on in Jade's chapters, right? And what is the conversation that's happening between these two characters? And like, how are their sort of shortcomings influencing each other? How are their desires influencing each other? And that was like a fun challenge to work through, but also like really exciting because it's a haunted house that talks, right? So it's really fun.
So when you first started writing it, there wasn't the house POV.
Well, the house POV came in pretty quickly. Like I wrote, I think like a few chapters from Jade's point of view, and I'm like, it's missing something. And like the line, the house eats and is eaten, just came into my mind, and I'm like, okay, this is where we're going. So it's working.
I love that. How did you decide on the themes in the book?
I think the themes kind of came naturally, like emerged naturally, just, as you're writing, especially because I was focused on a very specific experience, right? That's not quite my own, but like has echoes of my own, right? So like the themes with, family really came through because it's a family story. Like it is a coming of age story, but at its heart, it is a family story because, the things that are happening with Jade, even though she and her dad are so different, they're kind of motivated by the same thing, in the end. And I really wanted to see, like, how is a family haunted by things that happened in the past? And how do people who are seemingly so different on the surface end up actually making choices that are really similar?
I love that. What about the bugs?
Okay.
There are a lot of bugs in this book.
There are a lot of bugs in this book. Well, as a youth, I had unlimited access to the Sci-Fi Channel, the Animal Planet, and the Discovery Channel, and there's a lot of shows with, bugs and all those things, and I just became fascinated and also terrified by parasites, which could be in anything. So that was sort of like where it came from, and then of course, parasites, it's like they can live in you, and you don't even know, right? And I felt like that was a perfect metaphor for colonialism and for, what are these forces doing to a place, and how does it change a place, and what is the relationship between like sort of this force and a place. It's very parasitic, right? It's sort of the same thing, and like I felt like it was just a perfect metaphor to talk about that.
That's so intense, and it also feels like we humans are parasites in the houses, right?
Yeah. Agreed.
So what's the significance of the title? Like, how did you come up with it?
So actually the original title when I first started writing the book was The Haunting of Jade Wynn, and that's because I wanted it to be in conversation with movies and books that were already out there, right? So there's a lot of horror movies, a lot of, horror books that is like The Haunting of Emily Rose, The Haunting of Hill House, right? But I'd never seen a Vietnamese name, so I was like, I wanted to be in conversation with that. But as I started writing, I realized that, it isn't just about Jade. I mean, Jade is a big part of the story, but there are other women who lived in the house that the book is about, right? There are other women other than Jade and who have survived the house or didn't survive and are still there. And Jade herself can also become the she in the title. So I like the sort of being ambiguous and calling it She is a Haunting because it could be anyone who lived in this house and will live in this house.
Tell us a little bit about the research that you did.
The research was rough because I don't read in Vietnamese, so a lot of it was like online research, and then also like asking my family a lot of questions, like a lot of weird questions, like what is it like in this area, like when you visited there, like how do your extended family feel about this specific thing?
Were they like, WTF, like what are you plotting?
I mean, yes. I mean, my mom's always like, why do you write such weird stuff? I mean,
my mom says that too. We should get our parents together so they can commiserate. Did you go into any like abandoned houses or anything?
I did not. I don't know if I can handle it. I like to imagine it, Yeah.
So I know that there are some pre-published writers in the audience, and I wanted to dig into the writing process for a little bit. Can you tell us what it was like writing this? Like, how did you start drafting it? Are you a plotter or a pantser, a plantser?
I think I'm in between. So when I write a book, I always want to know what the ending is. And then it's sort of like figuring out like the checkpoints and then having a little flashlight and just figuring out like, hey, how do I get from here to here? But the biggest thing that I have to have when I'm drafting is that emotional thread for the story. Like, I've tried and it's like, I can't just get words down. Like, I have to have that emotional thread. Like, what is this person going through? And I also just have to have sentences that I'm excited about. Like, it's really rough when you're drafting and you're trying to make something beautiful and you're like, actually,
So it sounds like you spend a lot of time thinking about your characters before you even start writing.
I do. I mean, I always want to know like what they want and like what's standing in the way, and like I also want to know like what their journey is going to be like through the story. Like, not specifically like, oh, this is going to happen and it's going to change them in this way, but I want to know like this is a high point or this is a low point. I need like a sort of, I don't know, like a fight between these two people, like it's a pivotal emotional sort of event for them.
So do you write chronologically or do you jump around?
I try to write chronologically, but I also jump around. I do this annoying thing where I'll write a sentence for the end of the chapter, and then I'll write a sentence for the middle of the chapter, and then a sentence over here, and then I'll skip to the end, and I'll write there. So it's really annoying.
Is it that these like really lyrical sentences pop into your head and then...
It is, because it's like, you know, you're like imagining this scene, and you're like having this moment with the character, right? And you're like, this is the sentence that needs to happen here. And like, I'm like, oh, well, that's not helpful. It's like 300 pages later. I'm missing the middle. So, but it's like, I gotta write it down anyway. So 50 words for the day. Good job. So.
How often is it that those sentences end up staying? Like those specific ones that get dropped in?
I think the specific ones nearly always stay.
Oh, that's interesting. I like somehow clicked on something and went away. Oh, here we are. Okay. So they always end up staying. So are they kind of like almost like plotting out a roadmap for you?
I think in a way, yes, like an emotional roadmap. Like, I know this moment they're gonna have, I don't know, they're looking at something and they're feeling some certain way about it. So like it's like almost like these sentences are turning points that I know it's eventually gonna happen. So it's like a placeholder for later.
Okay, so then what do you do when you get stuck? Like as you're writing towards one of those placeholder sentences?
I wish I knew. I feel like I blacked out when I was like experiencing a writer's block. I cry a lot. I get a snack, but
What's your default writing snack?
Well, that one's hard. Chocolate.
Always a good one.
Yeah.
How did you figure out how to go about editing this story? Like, I feel like for greener writers, especially before it becomes clear like what goes into revision, so often we're kind of just like trying to figure out what revision even means. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how you figured out what needed to go into the editorial process.
I think it helps when you have like a strong vision of what you want the book to feel like at the end. But my background is in data analysis, so I take a lot of comfort in spreadsheets. So
Are you an Excel writer?
I don't write in Excel, but I will outline in Excel. So like
you are one of those strange breeds. I'm fascinated by this, so please tell us what your Excel document looks like.
I have multiple. So the main one, which is my reverse outline, is like every row is a chapter. And then I'll have the summary, and then I'll have the changes that I want to make. And then it's like tracking, then I track every single like plot thread or emotional thread. So like in this one, it's like I'll have a column for food, I'll have a column for bugs, I'll have a column for Jade's relationship with her dad, Jade's relationship with her love interest, Jade's relationship with the hot ghosts. Like, you know, different things. I'll have different things like that. And then as I fill it out, this is after the first draft, I'll see where, like, I dropped the ball. I'll see a lot of empty cells, and I know that I didn't talk about it enough. Like, it fell off the map. So that's one way of, like, organizing my outline. And then the second thing that I do is I have another sheet that's just, like, broken out to different acts, and it's just tracking every single character and what they want in that act, what are they doing to get it, and what are they doing to each other to to track the tension in each act, basically.
That sounds extremely chaotic.
It is chaotic, and I have to add that it's every book is also different. So it's this is what worked for She Is a Haunting. So.
I just really like the irony of using Excel, which is like an organizing software, to do something so chaotic that my head hurts imagining all these different columns.
But it doesn't feel chaotic. Okay, so Emily was telling me that she used to have a 65-page outline, and I was like, what? What? I mean, I have columns A through ZZ or something. That's fine.
Do you ever just plug in a formula to be like, this is, retrieve the section that's supposed to go here?
I haven't gone that far yet.
So this is your debut novel. I'm curious to hear about your journey to publication. When did you get your agent? How did you sell your book? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, so when I was 18, my mom told me I couldn't be a writer. Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming to my book launch. but I understood where she was coming from, right? Because it's hard to create art when you can't feed yourself. You don't have a stable home, that type of thing, right? So I really focused on the stability in my life, right, for many, many years until I decided I have a calling to do this thing, right? So in 2020, when I had savings and my partner had health insurance, I was like, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to give myself 1 year to do it. Be obsessive, because that's just how I am. I'm like all or nothing. It's really annoying. And, so I wrote She Is a Haunting and edited it in about 6 months. I started querying in April. I had my first offer 2 days later, and I signed with my agent early May, and then we did one more round of revision, and then we sent the book out for submission to try to sell it in early June, and then 2 weeks later we went to auction for the book and we sold the book, and it was exactly a year. It happened in a year.
For the writers in the audience, this is like a publishing timeline on steroids. That is not normally what happens.
It was like a very unicorn experience. I was like, should I buy a lottery ticket? This is really
yeah,
strange.
I mean, if you didn't, that was your mistake. That's amazing. So what's been the most exciting or surprising part of the publishing journey so far?
I think the response from booksellers, from librarians, from people who's read the book. I'm lucky enough that it's chosen as an Indie Next pick for kids, and then it's also a Barnes and Noble book club pick, a Target book club pick, and it just feels like it's gonna reach readers, and that's the thing that I really wanted. Right? I want my book to reach people who need it. Who can see themselves in the book, can see themselves in the experience of the book, or maybe don't see themselves but just enjoy being afraid. So I feel very thankful that it's going to be on shelves and that it's being received well.
Do you ever scare yourself while you're writing?
I do. I'm a very vivid dreamer, and actually a lot of the dreams that are in the book is inspired from my own dreams as well. But I had this creepy experience when I was writing this book where my house was infested with bugs. I was like, what's going on here? There's something with carpenter ants in there, and I was finding carpenter ants in my house. It's the middle of winter. I've said this before, but I found a carpenter ant in my coffee one day. So yeah, that was kind of creepy. That kind of stuff was creepy. I was like, I gotta stop.
Yeah, so you gotta just put it into your book. That's how you end the curse.
Or the book brought the curse.
So what types of stories do you find yourself reading? What are your favorite things to draw inspiration from? Do you have authors that you turn to time and again?
I will read anything that Emily XR Pan writes. And in fact, when I was writing this book, I had The Astonishing Color of After on my desk. And I started writing this book, and I found the will to write characters that looked like me and was dealing with different cultures because I read Emily's book. And, I kept it on my desk. So yes, very beautiful writing, I'm getting emotional. But, just stories that, just hit you in the chest. I love those kind of things. I love to read poetry because I just love the way that poets can, distill a moment, a feeling down to just a few lines. And it's very, even though I can't read a book, I can always read a poem.
Do you have any favorite poets?
Yeah, so I love this collection called Summer Always Hungry, and that was also a really big part of the inspiration for the book because it's all about um, South Korean diaspora and like the war, and like it talks about so much about food, hence the title. So one of my favorite collections, and her name is I think Ji Yoon. I apologize if I got that wrong, but Summer Always Hungry. It's amazing. Pick it up.
Awesome, thank you. We're gonna start taking questions in a second, so start brainstorming your questions. But I have one last thing to ask you, which is what are you working on now? What's next for you?
So I'm currently working on my second YA book. It's also a horror book, and I'm pitching it as a monster learns to love herself.
Ooh, I love that. Okay. Let's take audience questions. Anyone?
Yeah, I was curious also about your decision to give the house its own POV. Like, can you talk more about how you found to structure that throughout the novel and sort of like use it as a guidepost?
The question was, I'm repeating the questions for people on YouTube, so that you don't feel like you're losing your mind. So the question was about the house POV and how you figured out how to structure that and how to use it throughout the book as, I think you said, guideposts.
Mm-hmm. So houses, at least in Gothic horror, are often like characters and characters of their own. So like I took a lot of inspiration from The Haunting of Hill House, which has a lot about the house, and the house is like definitely a force. And the way that I decided to work in the house is that I saw the house as a body. And it goes back to the whole metaphor with the parasite. The house is a body, and so each of the house chapters is a body part. And oftentimes it's related to whatever, the house is talking about. And so it's just deciding, like, okay. I mean, it's also, the house is also in chronological order with the book, with Jade's point of view. So a lot of times it's like, I know that I need a moment and I need to check in on how the house is feeling about everything that's going on, Like Jade's doing some teenage stuff in the house. How does it feel? So it was fun to write because it's creepy, but often also kind of funny because you see like the push and pull between the two characters.
Cool. Is there? Yeah.
If you had to spend a night in a haunted house, which character from the book would you want to be with?
So the question is, if you had to spend a night in a haunted house, which character would you want to be with?
Oh, this is so hard. I'm not good at.
I would want to be with Florence.
That's true, Florence. At least she would make me feel better, even if we both died.
And she's hot.
Yeah, and she's.
Hashtag priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you start out with the intention of writing a YA book, or was it something that you found worked better for the story as you wrote?
So the question is whether you started out with the intention to write a YA book or if you figured that out as you wrote.
I definitely wrote it with intention of it being a YA book because I saw it as a very a coming of age experience for Jade, but also a coming of age experience for the house, which has a little bit of a live, love, and laugh journey going on as well. So like I wanted that balance of like it needs to be scary and I wanted to appeal to adult readers, but I also wanted it to be funny because that's my focus, right? I wanted to reach teenagers. Who may be experiencing the same thing, who may not have seen themselves in a book.
Teenagers who are interacting with hot ghosts.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's an excellent segue to my question because I feel we need to pay more attention to the ghosts. That's my absolute favorite part of this book, and I was just curious. The scenes with the ghosts are so vivid, and I wondered if you had to kind of like, I don't know, put yourself in like a different mindset or like psych yourself up to like write those scenes to sort of make them just like so rich.
So the question was about writing the scenes with the hot ghost and how you went about making them so rich.
So the hot ghost is actually from one of my dreams. But she wasn't a ghost in my dream. It was just a very creepy post-apocalyptic dream. And the first scene that she's in the book is almost directly what I dreamed. And I think that helps where it's like, I'm a very vivid dreamer, and like, so when I'm writing these sequences with the ghosts, I try to think about like, not everything is what it seems, and like just letting it flow, basically. Like, what do the ghosts want? How do they manipulate the things around the main character and how she sees the world?
It just occurred to me that when you take naps, you could consider that working.
You were a genius.
That's like, I need to train my brain to help me write in my sleep. Anyway, next question. Yeah.
I love the descriptions of food in the book. Will you talk a little bit about why you wanted to make that such a major part of the story?
The question was about the descriptions of food and why the food was so important to the story.
So I love food, and I love Vietnamese food, and food is a big part of my family culture. So every weekend, everyone gets together at one house. They make a bunch of food. They order a bunch of food. They have a lot of beer, and so I wanted that sort of experience for Jade, but in a different way, right? In the book, it's more about like her father. How does he use food to control Jade? How does he use food to manipulate Jade? Right, that kind of thing. And Vietnamese food is just delicious, so it's very easy to write. And I won't spoil the book, but there are some moments that, you know, people may find icky, but it's not related to like that specific food, because parasites can be in everything.
That should be the, you know, the subtitle that's like printed on the book. Any other questions? No? Okay, I think we will pivot to signing then. Oh yeah, I mean, what do you want to talk about? Are there more hot ghosts in other stories?
No, there's just the one. Just the one.
How did you go about figuring out kind of all the historical pieces of the story? Like, did that require research, or did you kind of dream up all these things about like the characters who are, you know, part of the colonialism and who are perpetuating this harm?
Yeah, it did require research, you know, because these things really happened, and so it was trying to figure out like chronologically what happened, and like just basically making a timeline. Like, okay, this is when they occupied this land, specifically in Dac. This is when they left. These are Dac. It's a real place. It's in central Vietnam. It's they decided to make it a vacation home because the weather is very moderate there, and they started building out there in, I think, 1910s. And so I felt like that was a very interesting thing. It's, you know, you're colonizing this land, and now you need a vacation home, and now you're going into the mountains and creating this place, right? And so I took like real sort of events to kind of like put it as a structure, right? And then I build around it in terms of like what kind of characters could exist in this period of time. And really just, I try to pay attention to making sure, because when you're doing research like this, oftentimes you can see things that are very troubling. So you have to kind of protect yourself as well. And also to approach it responsibly, because I didn't want to write anything that was like exploiting these terrible things that happen for horror, right? I just wanted to write the truth for one family.
Yeah, was that like a difficult line to balance between like what you're writing for the sake of the thrill versus what you're writing to like make your statement?
So there were definitely parts of the book where I was like, okay, this is inspired by something real that happened, but I don't want to get into detail about it because I didn't feel like it was a thing that I needed to personally explore. So it's mentioned because it's a terrible thing that actually happened, but where I tried to build the scares and the thrills are in like the actual character interaction. So I really focused on character and tried to build the atmosphere and the scares from there, rather than being like this terrible historical thing happened and that's the driving part of the story. It's not. The driving part of the story is this family, this girl, the people who lived and died in this house.
I feel like that's what makes it so immersive and really draws you in, the fact that we are so invested in the characters in order to reach that point of tension, as opposed to, I'm thinking of, you know, when there's a horror movie that's like full of jump scares and you end up not being that attached to anybody because it's only about the jump scares.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important from a storytelling perspective. What was the biggest challenge that you encountered in writing this book?
Oh, the biggest challenge. I think it's just making it as emotionally true as I could, without making it almost burdensome, like too long, too much, right? Naturally, I write very short. You know, my first drafts are like 50,000 words. So it's like an uphill battle, right? But I really value being able to control the amount of emotion or the amount of sort of speculation that goes on in the book. So like that's a challenge for me, like, you know, push and pull of like, how much do I need on the page and how much can I pull back?
So if your drafts are so lean, what are you kind of pulling out as you expand?
Oftentimes, I think it goes back to the whole thing where I'm like, oh, well, I wrote a sentence like 300 pages later, and then, you know, 50 pages earlier than that. So it's sort of like in the first draft, I almost like get in and out of a scene really quickly because I'm like, I'm excited for this other thing to happen, right? And so when I need to build the draft up, I have to slow down. Like that's actually really hard for me, is to slow down, because I'm like, well, this is boring. I'm just describing her walking down this hallway, or like, you know, but I kind of have to, you know, it's still an experience. She's still seeing things. But like for me, you know, some of the most exciting things, it's like, you know, those dramatic moments that I already wrote, you know.
So like you already wrote them because you had those sentences in mind to sort of guide them.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you encounter more of the feeling, or you draw out more of the feelings of your characters as you're revising?
I feel like the sentences often distill the feeling down to what I want it to be, and then when I'm revising, I have to build up basically to that moment, or like provide context to why they're feeling that way.
So it's really interesting because it sounds like at the prose level, your sentences actually guide a lot of all the other architecture of the story, right?
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot of authors talk about how they try to like do a fast draft and they just get the story down and they'll fix the sentences later. So it's really interesting to hear about a process where you're so focused that each sentence can actually provide this framework.
Yeah, and I tried to do the fast draft way, and it's very sad in the end, you know, because it's like, I'm not excited about what's going on here, you know.
Yeah, there's something about it that I also try to do the fast drafting and fail horribly at it most of the time. There's something about how inorganic it is and how it doesn't feel like story anymore.
Yeah, it's like I gotta get from point A to point B, and you just lose the feeling, I feel like.
Yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
Can you tell us what some of the sentences were that you were like aiming towards?
Oh, the question is if you can share some of the sentences were.
I can't remember the exact lines, but I'm trying to think about moments. So like the climax, at the end of the book, you know, there were a few lines that, you know, came to me, which are like the interaction between her and her dad. You know, it's like a clash moment. So those sentences came to me, for example, and I knew that when I get there, they will stay. There are other moments where it's like part of, you know, different sequences where, you know, she is interacting with a ghost or something like that, and it's also a pivotal moment. So oftentimes it's not even like it's like really great, you know, because it's just something that feels right. And I know that's not helpful, but
I wonder, like when you're kind of mapping out these sentences, Is there ever a point in your revision process where you realize that a sentence does not serve the original function that you expected it to?
For She's a Haunting is one of those unicorn books that like it just went really smoothly. But I can tell you that with my second book, yes, a lot. That happened a lot where it was like I wrote and then I got to a point where I was like, it's gotta go in the trash pile or the to save pile. Like it's just not working.
I don't know if there's a non-spoilery way to answer this, but I'm curious what the biggest change was between your earliest drafts and your final manuscript.
I think my earliest drafts, and this is actually not that interesting, but in my earliest drafts, I did use like a series of letters that like the character finds from the past that kind of like gives insight and context to like what's going on. And I think when I was drafting, I was like, I just need a quick way to get this information across. But when I was revising it, I was like, I don't like this. And like, so that I feel like was a big change where I was like, I removed like this whole other, like, almost like a special structure type of tool thing out from the book and had to like, reincorporate like, okay, now how do I provide the context for like what this character's learning, for example.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Do you have any tips for constructing or building fear and how you approach horror in your stories?
So the question was about how you go about constructing fear and building up the horror in your stories.
I think the biggest thing is drawing from your own fears in some way. So like, you know, I mean, other than like, you know, the emotional fear of like vulnerable conversations, but like for example, like I'm terrified of parasites. So like that came very naturally, right? And when I was writing it, you know, it was very easy. But I think that, I think you have to allow yourself to feel like there's a type of scare for every type of reader, and you will find someone that finds your book scary or your writing scary, right? And so it's just sort of reimagining what a scare is. So it's not just a jump scare, it's not just blood. It could just be building some ominous thing, like maybe there's like a light outside their window that just keeps getting closer. Like, you know, just something that's just like really building that atmosphere and really building that like it's coming towards you type of feeling.
I feel like it's really brave that you're scared of parasites and you chose to write about bugs. Like, there were many moments in the book where I was like, ugh, you know, I like had to pause a moment.
I mean, you know, you gotta live on the wild side, I guess. I mean, like, I used to watch this show called Monsters Inside Me that's just all about parasites, even though I was terrified. So, I mean, don't listen to me, I guess.
So you're a
bad
masochist.
decision.
Any other questions? How are we doing on time? I think I'm curious if you're extra excited about any books coming out this year.
Oh my gosh, my brain just blanked. Oh, but I am excited about Isabel Caña's next book. I think it's called Vampires of El Norte. I loved her first book, The Hacienda. I'm obsessed with it. Hot priest in a haunted house. You know, her biggest fan.
Yeah, that sounds very on brand for you. All right, well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming out. And I guess we'll pivot to signing now. Actually, I have no idea how to turn this off.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Trang is going to be signing by my colleague over there in the black shirt. If you guys wouldn't mind lining up over there. And thanks again for coming. If you're on the live stream tonight, we would encourage you to buy a copy of the book in the description. Thank you.
Just charge right the only way.